Hey everybody, this is Jason Kissel here. I want to share with you something I've been learning myself about non-traditional assessments, something I tried to do in the classroom and continue to try to push towards um, kind of evolving my philosophy on education. Before I jump in, I'm actually going to run this through a Pear deck, and it's asynchronous, right? So I think it'd be really cool, like if you watch this video, to jump on this. I'm just going to keep it open. If you do watch it, if you could fill out some of these answers as I go through, I put it on student pace mode in Pear Deck, so you can just go through slides and kind of type in some answers, what you think or agree, disagree. I think that'd be a really cool way to kind of get some results, since this is just a recording. All right, so let's do this. So originally, the plan for this was year one resident educators in Ohio, first year teachers, to kind of just think about this. I feel like when I did my teacher training, this was a little bit taboo. We didn't really talk about this in our training, and so I just think it's a really good topic. All right, so my first question to you is, what's your knee-jerk reaction when you hear non-traditional assessment? I think a lot of people, maybe I'm wrong here, but I think a lot of people just think it's good in theory, but not great in practice. That would probably be what I would type here, right? So, again, if you could join the Pear Deck and just type them in as you watch this, that'd be super cool to me. You just join pd.com, type this in. You're actually going to be anonymous. You're not going to log in with any Google account or anything, so anybody can do it. Very cool. All right, here's assessment, how it started and how it's going, right? I mean, it hasn't really changed. We put kids in rows and we give them a paper pencil test, or we give them a Chromebook and tell them to take a test. But for the most part, this is pretty much what assessment is like, right? I can think back to my days in education of, graduation tests, proficiency tests, AP tests, entrance exam tests for undergrad, for grad school, right? This is it. It's not too far off. So, why hasn't it evolved in hundreds of years at this point, right? Why are we doing the same thing we were doing hundreds of years ago? No industry really keeps that standard, right, except for education. So here's another thing where we can maybe evolve. Here's where I'm coming from. I taught sheltered algebra 1, I taught inclusion algebra 1, I taught general ed algebra 1, all the way up to AP stats. When I taught math, I'm now in a tech role, tech liaison, right? So, but that's my experience. So I've taught kind of the whole gamut, and I always had this weird thing about, I felt like grades and assessments, they're really about showing up, have a good attitude, turn everything in, and not about, that's compliance based, right? And what do we do to move past compliance based? What does a grade really reflect? What is an assessment really trying to show? Formative or summative, it doesn't matter what type of assessment we're talking about. I witnessed firsthand lots of testing anxiety, and how can we mitigate that, right? How can we give people confidence going into a test? What are some strategies to just lessen that anxiety, right? When I don't think anybody would say, I want my students to be more anxious when they come to my class. Certainly not a goal of mine. All right, student fatigue, disinterest in testing environments. I'm really thinking about, like, when I would proctor the end of course exams or proctor an SAT or ACT, serious fatigue. I mean, it was hard for kids to endure 3-4 hours of testing. So just think, if they're in a middle school or high school and they've got 2 or 3 courses with period long tests, traditional tests, that's really the same environment, right? I mean, they're going from class to class and getting a break, but for the most part, it's the same exact environment. So, be cautious of creating that. And then, some things to think about that I did. I did standard-based grading for 4 years with Algebra 2 group. Lots of different alternative assessments that I'll talk about later, and then try to give people multiple options to demonstrate their learning, just other than paper and pencil. All right. So this is kind of my jumping off point for this whole thing. I think many of us believe there are issues with testing students so frequently, so why do we keep doing it, right? We test all the time. And I'm not saying we're going to be able to fix the testing environment that we're in. We're not the Department of Education. We're not the Secretary of Education at the federal level, right? But What can we do? Why do we keep doing it in our classes? Why do we feel like we need to test them every 2 weeks? Why do we feel like give them a traditional test all the time? Here's my answers to that. So again, that's on the Pear deck, right? So it'd be cool if you type that in. But here are my answers. It's how we've always done it. Very popular answer in education. It's how we've always done it. So let's just keep doing it. I'm going to actually touch on that one last because that one really hits home to me. Many things in education we structure around our educational experience. This one is probably the most true for myself. I actually tried as a teacher to do everything opposite that I hated when I was in high school, right? If I hated it in high school, why would I ever try to duplicate that? So a lot of those things that I had a negative experience, I tried to kind of flip the script on those when I became a teacher. It's really tough to create new experiences for assessment. Okay, like it's hard to make non-traditional assessment because I never was taught that as a teacher. Our groups don't work, our teacher-based teams don't work on that, so it's tough. Yeah, I agree. And then it takes more time, probably. We'll talk about that. So those are my 4 reasons. I'm going to go through each one of these. We're going to talk about what can we do about that issue, and then what are some examples of how to get around it. All right. So for this Pear deck question, I just kind of was thinking you could circle or underline or star things that stuck out to you as maybe you resonate with, right? So think critically about who you were as a student, either in when you were a little kid, high school, grad school, undergrad, whatever. Were you a fast finisher, slow deliberator when you were taking tests? Were you one of the ones who always raised their hand in the front of the room, or were you silent? Did you get into trouble? Were you attached to the teacher's hip? Tests, big deal, not a big deal to you. And then how did those biases that you carry with you and how you approach situations, how does that affect how you teach your class, right? It would be foolish to think those things don't matter and they don't affect how you teach your class because, of course, you're going to try to make that environment the best that you could possibly make it, right? And then my question is, how do you reach every single student on this list, right? Like if they're the fast finisher but they're the silent thinker and they're the troublemaker still because they're always like messing around with their friends, and they're the test wizard, or if it's a fast finisher, answer blower, you could put a lot of combinations together. How do you reach every single one of these kids? And I bet it's not with just giving a traditional assessment, a traditional paper and pencil assessment, whether it's formative or summative, right? It could just be an exit ticket, but it's paper and pencil, or it could be a test, it's paper and pencil. It's the same medium, right? It's the same thing. So for me personally, I was a fast finisher, a silent thinker. I wasn't really either of those. I guess I was probably more teacher's pet. I always wanted to please people. And test wizard, I stress it didn't play a role. So I have to be really cognizant of this is not how everybody is, right? Some people take a long time to figure out questions. Some people are really stressed out when they take an assessment. So how do I mitigate that, right? All right, here's some ideas. Oh, before I get to my ideas, I'm sorry. What tools allow us to? Okay, so here's what I was thinking with this one, with the 1, 2, 3, and 4. I was thinking which one of these seems most important to you and least important. So you'd put a 1 next to the one that's most important, 2, 3, 4. All right, so what digital tools? Because I'm a tech guy, so I got to come up with digital tools. Give us more time, louder voice, show personality, and feel relaxed. So those kind of go with the questions from before, right? And so how do we do that for all students? All right, here's the first one. Esther Park, probably Esther Park's biggest fan at this point. I feel like I have to be. MrsPark.org. She has amazing templates, amazing work. You should just stop the video and go look at her website and just be done. But here's an example that she does with breakout rooms. She has 4 different rooms, and the rooms aren't everybody doing the same task. It's everybody doing different tasks, right? So there's a room for teacher help, just an open group, a quiet group, and then by yourself group. So a really powerful way to structure something that maybe a lot of us do, breakout rooms right now in digital world. But how do you make that more personable for kids to have a little bit of choice, right? So there's her example. Now, I want to think, how do I take that example and make that something for assessment, right? How can I use breakout rooms maybe? How can I use the idea of 4 different options or 3 different options? And how can I kind of tweak an assessment to make it better? So, there are kids who just want to take a paper and pencil assessment. Is there any problem with that? Absolutely not. So maybe that's our quiet room, right? More traditional school. Maybe the group room, maybe you have a different set of problems for people working in a group. So maybe they can be paired 2 and 3 people. You have more problem-based activities or something where there are prompts for each kid, and that's their problem set. And then maybe the other group, the teacher help group, I don't know, you give kids, an opportunity to do something different than just taking a paper and pencil test. Maybe it's an interview process with the teacher, right? Maybe it's more of like just an oral assessment instead of something written. And this takes time, right, to think about and try to figure out. And it's going to be different for every assessment. It's not always going to make sense to do the same thing every time, right? So I love the idea of breakout rooms, though, and having different types of assessment in different rooms. I'm a huge Desmos fan. Desmos Activity Builder is amazing. I'm actually going to jump to this real quick. Desmos is geared toward math and graphs and, some great science application as well. But I would argue, the card sorts in Desmos, some of the matching in Desmos, you could make Desmos work for any content area if you really wanted to, if you really loved the setup. So a really cool thing about using something like Desmos Activity Builder is it's something that the students would be familiar with to begin with, right? So if you've done activities in the past, then if your assessment, formative or summative, right? I'm not really splitting hairs here and just talking about assessment in general, has to do with Desmos, maybe that's something they're familiar with. So I really like this because if I say I can't do this question, I quite frankly can't do it on paper and pencil, right? I can't click and drag something on paper and pencil. Of course, I could have them like write, but see how dynamic that is? Like I just can't replicate that anywhere else. All right, so another thing I really like about this is we can kind of level up the difficulty. So this first question is just click and move it, right? Nobody really needs any parabola knowledge to know that that's what we're trying to do, okay? And then they can kind of progress through this. There's some written questions. We can also throw in multiple choice. We can throw in just math type questions. Okay, this is a static screen where they can they can't really do much besides click and see maybe a point, but there's no interacting with it, right? So there's just a lot of really great options to ask different types of questions than you could have ever asked before. All right. And then this would probably be my go-to. I wish I knew about Flipgrid before I left the classroom. I think if I went back to the classroom, it'd be the tool I'd use the most. I just want people to explain what they're thinking, how they figure things out, and why they know what they know, right? One of my favorite questions that I've seen, I don't know who to credit with this, right? I wish I knew. I wish I had somebody to credit. Is this tell me what you know? So maybe I give a traditional paper pencil test, but like I missed some concept that a kid knows really well or some little nuanced detail that a kid knows really well, and I didn't get an opportunity for them to demonstrate their learning, right? And I think I remember back when I was a kid, like a teacher would say, okay, on the back, write down everything you know about this topic. And that's kind of hard to do, right? But there are some kids out there who would really benefit from this. So this prompt is, there's just a lot of information on this assessment. We couldn't get to it all. So I apologize that I didn't ask you about everything you knew. So record a 1-minute video for me. You can use, blur out your screen and just do audio. You could do a screen share and you could be writing things. However you want to do it, just do it right here. And this one was about, maybe, we did some readings and you remember that stuff and it wasn't asked about on the assessment. So just tell me what you know. And of course, grading gets a little bit hairy here, and I think we might have to work out some details of how does this work into the final grade. But I think you can be creative with that as well. I don't think the grading has to be as traditional either if the assessment isn't. A couple other ones I love. Synth is basically like 256-second podcasts. So you could have a kid record, 4 or 5 of those back to back to back to back, and we could hear some type of podcasting language, which is a super popular medium for media right now anyways, and it's a great option. And then Soundtrap at the bottom is made for podcasting. They've got Soundtrap Free to You, which is a paid product, but if your kids are over 13, they can use Soundtrap Free. If they're under 13, you'd want to sign up for a 30-day sound trap free to you. Oh man, I'm gonna keep trying. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, my next item. It's really tough to create new experiences for assessments. Yeah, I agree. It is really tough. I'm not even gonna lie to you. That is one of the hardest things, is to come up with new ideas sometimes, right? You just want to reuse a bunch of old ideas or just use what you already got. So my experience on this is make one change at a time. Don't try to change an entire course in a summer or over a break. Pick an assignment or an assessment or something that you do as like a formative check once a semester and modify it. Take the time to modify it really well, and then over the course of 5 or 6 years, you've got 10 to 12 of these things that you've created, and now you've got a lot better content. So I also realize the longer kids are in school, the more they want a traditional environment, because that's what they've expected to see from kindergarten to 8th grade or whatever, when you get to the kid. So just know it's a learning curve for kids as much as it is for you, right? Like, it's hard for you to create a new assessment. It's also hard for kids to learn how to take a new assessment. So it's a little bit of a growing pain, but I think it's absolutely worth it. And then my last tip on that is don't just use the same medium, right? Paper and pencil and computers are great. Think about how you can use a computer in a different way. Can they make a website? Can they use something other than Google Slides for presentation, right? Can you use chalk on the sidewalk? Can you use markers or paint? Some kids just love working with art supplies, right? Just speaking out loud. Some kids are just naturally gifted. Recording things, making a collage. When I was in school, I remember making collages and thinking it was awesome. It was never part of a school grade, and I just made them. And then there's a million social media templates out there. I'd encourage you to maybe check out Matt Miller's ditchthattextbook.com. He's got a ton of them on there. They're usually built in something like Google Slides, and you can make something look like TikTok or Instagram without them ever getting onto that. So that could be a great option. Here's some examples from me. A lot of the things I just said are what I did. Graphing trig functions is not a very exciting topic for a lot of people. It's extremely tedious, and it's really hard to get the axes correct. Like, it's very arbitrary depending on the equation. And I always felt like the graphs just were so messy unless I set it up perfectly for them, which is a giant pain, right? And it doesn't really assess their learning. So I paired them up. I gave them 2 different random graphs, and I asked them to graph one cycle of it. So that's really it. And they had to label the axes correctly, and the points had to be in the correct spot. I went out right outside my classroom. They did this one period. I took pictures with my phone of all of them, and I graded them and then sent them the picture back. It wasn't too bad of an assessment. I would say the grading took less time than grading traditional paper pencil. A huge fan of these 2 on Twitter, so you should maybe look them up. But I think this is a really great way for formative assessment to get attacked. So instead of just giving them problems saying do these problems, that's not very rich. It's not very exciting. We're still using paper and pencil here. We could use whiteboards or anything, or something different, maybe on a Chromebook. We could put this on a Pear deck, right? Which problem is the most difficult? Which 2 equations are the most similar? Which one doesn't belong? So we're not really asking you to solve these, and I understand that's an important skill, but almost more important is conceptually understanding the differences and similarities between them. And you can use your mathematical language, like combining like terms, using the distributive property, all those types of things when explaining, right? So I love this kind of revamping problem sets like that, from the traditional to something a little bit more unique. I found this book in my grandma's house. I thought the zero explanation was very unique, right? And so then I thought, well, could we make a children's book with my EL students, and they could practice their language, make it on Book Creator, and we could go, we could use negative numbers, positive numbers. We can work in some of our academic vocab as well as just our language skills. So I thought that was a really cool example of somebody making, publishing a book like that, and we can make it now with something like Book Creator, which is free and amazing and really easy to use. It takes more time. Okay. I don't have an argument on it takes more time, because probably it will at the beginning, like most good things in life. It's not going to come easy to you. If it was really easy, I think a lot of people would be doing this because they see the gains and the excitement in kids. But it could take you more time in creating an implementation or in assessing or in giving feedback, right? But all three of those things are important. Creating a meaningful assignment, giving them enough time to do it. Maybe it takes 3 days instead of 1 day. Well, that's just how it goes, or giving timely and meaningful feedback might be a little bit cumbersome as well. But use technology to your advantage. Give feedback via video, right? Just record a minute video for each kid and send it back. That's really quick. That's quicker than grading a bunch of assessments, in my opinion. It takes me probably longer than a minute to create an assessment. So, and then collaborate with colleagues is by far the best thing, right? If you can even if you're both creating things independently, you can collaborate and share resources, and then you'll have double the resources, right? It's how we have always done it. All right. What's advantageous about this? What's harmful about this? That would be a Pear question if we were doing this live, right? So again, if you're like skipping around in this, joinpd.com, type that in. This is just going to be open. You can go to this slide and you can type in one or two of those answers. When you submit an answer in text on Pear Deck, if you want to submit another answer, you can just say add another. So if you wanted to, you could say advantageous and answer that, submit that one, and then add another and put harmful. And you could give me both answers in separate bubbles. Or you could do them all in the same. All right, I have a big issue with it's how we've always done it. I think it's really harmful to the same group of people over and over and over again. But let's talk about how we've always done it and why that's a thing. So it seems like back in the mid 1800s, we switched from oral exams, which is how we used to do education, to written exams, basically to educate the masses, just so we could have some use of policy decisions, administrative decisions. It really wasn't about learning. It was about the background of education, how to make it easier for the decision makers, right? Well, that should be a huge red flag if that's how we started doing written assessments. That was the main reason why to do it, right? It wasn't about assessing student learning. It was to make decisions. Okay, so let's just keep that in mind. That was, we're going on like what, 150 years ago. 1922, John Dewey, father of education in America, warns of our overuse of testing. That's almost 100 years ago now. So almost 100 years ago, John Dewey was like, I think we test people too much, which is crazy because it's obviously a huge issue with education today, right? And then we're going to go speed up the timeline. 2001, No Child Left Behind added a ton of state-mandated testing, which is kind of the environment we're living in today. Although Every Student Succeeds, which passed in 2015, is trying to reduce that load a little bit, right? I think we all know we feel like people test too much, but that's just my brief timeline. I took that from NEA.org. There's more in there, but I took out the four that I thought were really important. Okay, so let's jump off of that. It harms the same group of people. What I mean by that is biased towards white, middle, and high-income people. Yeah, it's just what it is. Standardized testing is biased towards those groups and supports those groups continuing to move forward. If you read any of these articles which cite research in all of them, you're going to realize that's absolutely true, especially in standardized testing like entrance exams, like the SAT and the ACT. And in state tests, I mean, it doesn't feel like standardized testing ever moved away from being a racist policy, really. So I don't think we have the ability right now to change standardized testing, right? So how do we do this? What do we do? Well, I think what's happened is standardized testing has become the norm. And so we've broken standardized testing down into our classes, right? We've kind of mimicked that environment in our own classes, thus kind of enabling the same groups of people to be pushed up to the top and the same groups of people to be marginalized. That's just how it has happened, right? And so what you have to do is you have to break the cycle of traditional assessment, paper and pencil tests, making it look like the ACT and the SAT and the Ohio State tests and whatever entrance exam you want to give. You have to break the cycle. Break it in your own classroom, right? You can't. It would be unreasonable for me to say, let's just go to the Secretary of Education. Well, we currently don't have one. She resigned, and let's get this policy working, right? That's a big ask, but a less big ask would be to change your own environment, right? So utilize oral assessment. Think about how to do things not on paper or computer, even if you have to do some of it on there, right? I understand having to do some of it on there. And I understand some assessments just being paper pencil. I get that too. I'm not saying everything has to change. I'm saying this should be something that we cognitively think about when we're creating assessments, formative or summative. What really matters is students demonstrating learning of the process, of the concept, of the procedure, of whatever you're doing. They have to demonstrate their learning. However they do that is fine. It doesn't, demonstrate learning in one specific way, I don't think. And we can't ignore standardized testing, but let's make our classes feel like we're not just teaching to one giant test, right? It's not really a fun environment to be in. Like, I don't love just learning things to take a test. I don't find that particularly enjoyable. Okay. So, how do we do it, right? Timely feedback, working collaboratively, and improving learning. Okay, so these are three things that I feel like we miss on a lot of times in traditional assessment, traditional education. So what timely feedback used to look like would be something like test corrections or extra credit assignments or written feedback. We didn't allow people to work. We would call working collaboratively a project, but it wouldn't be an assessment, right? It would be like a project. This wasn't really testing how well you've learned or worked with other people, although those are skills that you need for your entire life. So I think how we change that, I don't think test corrections really are that beneficial. I think it's usually just busy work for kids who, typically do the work to get a little bit better grade. I don't see a lot of kids who score, a 40% on an assessment, then doing amazing test corrections and understand the concept, right? So instead, we can give them audio and video feedback. You can use something like Kami to give them feedback. You can pull up their assessment and look at it on Kami. You could use Screencastify. You can use Flipgrid. You could record yourself with the extension Mote. There's so many options here to give feedback, but give it timely. I mean, it is hard as a teacher, I understand that, but if you give them some type of assessment and you wait 2 weeks to give them feedback, that's gone. It's gone. It's not as relevant anymore, right? So timely feedback is super relevant. I think in terms of improving on learning, standards-based grading is a way to go, because I think kids can see, with 0 through 4 scores or however you set up standard-based grading, they can instantly see which standards they really understand and which ones they don't. In addition to that, I used retakes in my class, but I did retakes based on the standards. So if we assessed on more than one standard for whatever concept we were working on, and you did well on everything but one little piece, why would I make you redo everything you already learned? That's silly. So you would reassess on some standard, right? And then mastery learning is a concept that keeps getting thrown around. But what I think when I think mastery learning is students understanding what they know well and what they don't know well, right? And it all going back to students understanding, reflecting on their work, right? So just a few ideas there. Some more examples. Okay, I would agree that even when I was in high school, oral assessment seemed impossible. How would you assess even 30 kids in one class period or in an hour, right? If you had to interview each one face to face, which I think there's value in that, but I think it's very difficult to do. But with technology, it seems so easy, right? Like, create a Flipgrid, just tell them to create a Screencastify. There's a lot of ways to do this, and hearing people talk about concepts really helps them solidify what they understand in their own brain, right? Evolve assessments, but be cognizant of where your students are. So meet people where they are is a huge thing that matters in life. Meet people where they are, right? So don't just change everything and then expect kids to just follow along, right? This is a learning process for them as well. So if your assessment now is with groups of people, they're going to have to learn how to work with a group of people in order to finish their assessment. I might be brand new to them, right? Those are things that need to be coached along the way. You can't just assume because I'm going to change everything, they're just going to fall into. I like the idea of still giving paper and pencil tests for those that are comfortable doing it. But let's make a choice board for our assessment, maybe, instead of just a choice board for what we do in class that day, right? A lot of us love utilizing choice boards or stations or some type of rotational group. Why not just utilize that idea in an assessment as well, right? It can still be a testing type environment or a formative check in some way. So, I think choice for taking an assessment also has a lot of power. And then vary the experience. Don't just make it very predictable, right? If all you do is make a paper and pencil test and a Flipgrid assessment every time, it won't feel much different, right? And sometimes it fails. Not every idea is a great idea. I have a lot of horrible ideas myself. And then my last one, this really isn't related to what we're talking about, but because it's a tech tool relating to assessment, I want to touch on it before somebody says, well, what about this? I think Edulastic can be a great option, especially if we're trying to, prepare kids for what the type of assessment looks like on an end of course exam or, for a standardized test. I think it's a really great platform for those types of things, but just be careful. If everything is on Edulastic, it doesn't feel any different than taking an end of course exam. It doesn't to the kids, and maybe that's the environment you're trying to create, but I think that maybe harms them in actually showing you what they're learning, right? So I think there's a lot of value. There's some amazing question types on Edulastic, and I think you can do some really powerful stuff with it. But it's just a word of caution that I don't know if every assessment should live on Edulastic, even though it mimics the state test or the standardized test that you're working on. I don't know how much value we can put in mimicking those questions to get a better result. I think the problem solving, the critical thinking, understanding large concepts and being able to explain them helps you a lot more than being able to see a question type that you recognize and trying to mimic that process. That usually doesn't end up being successful. I'd love to know your thoughts. If you agree, disagree, want to talk more, please let me know. The slides will be in the description, and this is something I'm going to continue to explore with more research and more, maybe try to do some action research with people who are on board and how assessment changes maybe not only the outcome, right, the grade of the student, but also the mindset of the student as well. So let me know what you think. I'd love to hear it.